I never expected a Tuesday morning to end with flashing red and blue lights in my driveway. But that's exactly what happened after Patricia Henderson decided my children were being neglected because they built a snowman. My name is Keith Daniels, and I moved to Pinewood Grove Estates in Boulder, Colorado 3 years ago with my wife Michelle and our 2 kids, 7-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Jake. The neighborhood seemed perfect at first, with its manicured lawns, matching mailboxes, and friendly faces at every corner. What I didn't realize was that beneath that picturesque surface lurked an HOA board that treated the community bylaws like they were amendments to the Constitution itself. Patricia Henderson was the HOA president, a 52-year-old woman who wore pearls to neighborhood meetings and had never met a rule she didn't want to enforce with extreme prejudice. She lived 3 houses down from us in a pristine colonial that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. Her husband worked in finance and traveled constantly, which meant Patricia had plenty of time to patrol the neighborhood looking for violations. The incident started on a Saturday morning in February. Colorado had gotten dumped on the night before, about 8 inches of fresh powder that transformed our subdivision into a winter wonderland. My kids woke me up at 7 in the morning, practically bouncing off the walls with excitement about building snowmen and having snowball fights. Michelle was visiting her sister in Phoenix for the weekend, so it was just me and the kids. "Dad, can we go outside? Please, please, please." Emma was already pulling on her snow pants over her pajamas. "Let me make some coffee first, kiddo," I said, rubbing sleep from my eyes. "And maybe you should put on actual clothes under those snow pants." Jake was doing his own version of getting ready, which involved putting his winter boots on the wrong feet and trying to wear 3 different hats at once. I helped them both get properly dressed, made sure they had gloves that matched, and sent them outside while I stood on the porch with my coffee, watching them dive into the snow with pure joy. They spent the next hour building what they declared was the best snowman in the whole neighborhood. It had a slightly crooked carrot nose, stick arms at odd angles, and a scarf that Jake insisted on wrapping around it 5 times. It was perfect in the way only kids' creations can be. I was taking pictures on my phone when I noticed Patricia walking down the sidewalk with her little dog, a yappy Pomeranian named Princess. She stopped in front of our house, staring at my kids with an expression that I can only describe as deeply offended. "Excuse me, Keith," she called out in that tone that always made my shoulders tense up. "Are you aware that your children are violating HOA regulations?" I walked down the porch steps, confused. "They're building a snowman, Patricia. How's that violating anything?" She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through it with her free hand, while Princess strained at the leash, yapping at my kids. Section 8, Paragraph 4 of the Community Guidelines states that all lawn decorations must be approved by the HOA board before installation. That includes temporary seasonal displays. "You're kidding me. It's a snowman. It'll melt in a week." "The rules don't specify duration. A decoration is a decoration," she sniffed, her breath forming little clouds in the cold air. "Besides, your children have been outside for over an hour now. It's barely above 20 degrees. Where's Michelle?" "She's visiting family. I'm perfectly capable of watching my own kids. Patricia, they should be inside where it's warm. This is borderline neglect." My jaw clenched. "They're dressed appropriately. They're having fun, and they're in their own front yard where I can see them. There's nothing neglectful about letting kids play in the snow." Emma and Jake had stopped playing and were watching us nervously. I could see Emma's smile fading, and that made my anger spike. "We'll see what the appropriate authorities have to say about that," Patricia said cryptically, then turned on her heel and marched back toward her house, Princess trotting along beside her. I didn't think much of it at the time. Patricia was always making vague threats about reporting people for one violation or another. Last month, she'd threatened to report the Johnsons because their Christmas lights stayed up until January 3rd. The month before that, she'd sent a formal complaint to the city about the Martinez family because their teenage son played basketball in their driveway after 5 p.m. The complaints never went anywhere, so I figured this was more of the same. The kids and I spent the rest of the morning playing outside, then went in for hot chocolate and grilled cheese sandwiches. They were tired and happy, their cheeks flushed from the cold, exactly like kids should be after a morning in the snow. Monday morning arrived with the usual chaos of getting kids ready for school. I dropped them off, headed to work at my accounting firm, and spent the day buried in tax returns. It was a perfectly ordinary day until I got home at 5:30 and found a business card wedged in my front door. It was from Colorado Child Protective Services. There was a handwritten note on the back. Please call regarding a report filed concerning your children. Caseworker Sandra Chen. My blood ran cold. I fumbled for my phone and dialed the number with shaking fingers. CPS, this is Sandra Chen speaking. Hi, this is Keith Daniels. I found your card on my door. What's this about? Mr. Daniels, yes, I need to schedule a home visit to follow up on a report we received, alleging child neglect. Neglect? There must be some mistake. My kids are fine. They're healthy. They're fed. They go to school every day. I understand this is stressful, Mr. Daniels. These reports are taken very seriously, and we're required to investigate all allegations. The report stated that your children were left outside in dangerously cold temperatures for extended periods without adequate supervision. Patricia. That vindictive woman had actually called CPS because my kids played in the snow. My kids were building a snowman in our front yard while I watched them from the porch. They were dressed warmly. They were never out of my sight, and they were having fun. This is ridiculous. I need to conduct a home visit, Mr. Daniels. It's procedure. How does tomorrow at 10 a.m. work for you? I wanted to argue, to tell her this was a waste of everyone's time, but I knew that wouldn't help. Fine, tomorrow at 10. After I hung up, I immediately called Michelle. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear my sister-in-law's kids screaming in the background. Hey, honey, how are things going? Patricia called CPS on us. She what? I explained the whole situation while Michelle's shock turned to fury. That miserable woman. I'm coming home right now. No, finish your visit. I'll handle the home visit tomorrow, but Michelle, what if they actually think I did something wrong? What if they try to take the kids? They won't. You're an amazing father. We have a good home, and the kids are happy and healthy. This is harassment, plain and simple. Document everything, okay? Take pictures, save any messages or emails from Patricia. We might need them. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about worst-case scenarios, about Emma and Jake being taken away over something so absurd. I got up at 6 a.m. and spent 3 hours cleaning the house until it was spotless. Not that it was dirty to begin with, but I needed to make sure there was nothing that could possibly be construed as problematic. Sandra Chen arrived exactly at 10. She was a tired-looking woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. I invited her in, trying not to look as anxious as I felt. Thank you for meeting with me, Mr. Daniels. I know this process can be stressful. Can I ask who reported us? Reports are confidential, but I can tell you that the caller claimed your children were outside in dangerous weather conditions for several hours without adequate supervision or protective clothing. That's not what happened. My kids were outside for maybe 90 minutes. They were bundled up in proper winter gear, and I was on the porch the entire time watching them. They were building a snowman. It's what kids do in Colorado in the winter. Sandra nodded, making notes. May I see the children's rooms? I showed her around the house. Emma's room with its collection of stuffed animals and art projects covering the walls. Jake's room with its dinosaur theme and toy cars scattered across the floor. Our kitchen with its fully stocked pantry and refrigerator. The bathroom with kids' toothbrushes and bath toys. Where are the children now? Sandra asked. At school. I can show you their attendance records if you want. They've never missed a day except when Emma had the flu in October. That won't be necessary. Do you have photographs from the day in question? I pulled out my phone and showed her the pictures. My kids grinning in their snow gear, building their lopsided snowman, having the time of their lives. Their cheeks were rosy, but they were clearly happy and comfortable. Sandra studied the photos carefully. What time were these taken? Between 8 and 10 in the morning. Temperature was probably about 25 degrees, not particularly cold for Colorado in February. And where was your wife? Visiting her sister in Phoenix. She's coming back tomorrow. Sandra continued her inspection, checking the smoke detectors, looking at the first aid kit in our bathroom, even opening the refrigerator to verify we had adequate food. Finally, she sat down at our kitchen table and closed her notebook. Mr. Daniels, I'm going to be frank with you. This report appears to be completely unfounded. Your home is clean and safe, your children are clearly well cared for, and the photographs show nothing remotely concerning. If anything, they show two happy, healthy kids enjoying a normal winter activity with appropriate supervision. Relief flooded through me. So this is over. I'll be filing a report stating that the allegations are unsubstantiated. However, I should warn you that if we receive multiple reports, even unfounded ones, it can sometimes trigger additional scrutiny. Do you have any idea why someone would make a false report? I hesitated, then decided honesty was the best policy. My HOA president has it out for us. She's been trying to find violations wherever she can, and when she saw the kids playing outside, she told me it was neglect. I didn't think she'd actually call CPS, though. Sanders' expression darkened. Filing a false CPS report is a serious matter, Mr. Daniels. It wastes our resources and takes time away from children who genuinely need help. If you believe this was done maliciously, you may want to consult with an attorney. After Sandra left, I picked up the kids from school and tried to act like everything was normal. But inside, I was seething. Patricia hadn't just threatened me or sent a nasty email. She'd weaponized a government agency designed to protect children, all because my kids had built a snowman without HOA approval. Michelle came home the next day, and we spent the evening discussing our options. "We need to do something," Michelle said, pacing our living room. "She can't get away with this." Sandra said we could talk to a lawyer. Then that's what we do, first thing tomorrow. I called 3 law firms on Wednesday morning before finding one that specialized in HOA disputes. The attorney, a sharp woman named Jennifer Morrison, listened to our story with increasing interest. "This is more serious than a typical HOA dispute," she said during our consultation. "Filing a false CPS report is a crime under Colorado law. It's a Class 3 misdemeanor, punishable by up to 6 months in jail and a fine. But more than that, it's grounds for a civil suit for harassment and emotional distress." "I just want her to stop," I said. "I want to protect my family." Then I suggest we take a 2-pronged approach. First, we'll file a formal complaint with the police about the false report. Second, we'll file a civil suit against both Patricia Henderson personally and the HOA board for harassment and creating a hostile living environment. Do you have records of other incidents? Michelle pulled out a folder she'd been compiling. Letters from the HOA about minor violations, emails with threats of fines, a formal complaint about our mailbox being the wrong shade of black, another complaint about Emma's pink bicycle being visible from the street. Jennifer flipped through the documents, nodding. "This establishes a pattern. Good. I'll draft the complaints and we'll move forward. I should warn you, though, this could get ugly. HOAs don't like being challenged, and from what you've told me, Patricia Henderson sounds like the type who'll escalate rather than back down." She wasn't wrong. The police took my statement about the false CPS report on Thursday. The officer, a sympathetic man named Rodriguez, assured me they'd investigate and potentially press charges. "We take false reports seriously," Officer Rodriguez said. "When people abuse the system for personal vendettas, it puts real victims at risk." The civil suit was filed on Friday. By Saturday morning, every member of the HOA board had received their copies. Patricia showed up at our door at 8 a.m., practically vibrating with rage. "You're suing us? You're suing the HOA? You called CPS and made false allegations about my family, Patricia. What did you think would happen? I was concerned about your children's welfare. That's not a crime. Making a false report is absolutely a crime. You knew those kids were safe. You did it because you were mad about a snowman, and now you're going to face the consequences. We'll fight this. The HOA has excellent lawyers. You'll regret this. The only thing I regret is buying a house in this neighborhood." She stormed off, and I closed the door, my hands shaking. Michelle came down the stairs in her robe. "Was that Patricia?" "Yeah, she's not taking it well." "Good, she shouldn't." The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Normally, maybe 10 or 15 homeowners showed up to these things. This time, the community center was packed with at least 60 people. Word had spread about the lawsuit, and everyone wanted to hear what would happen. Jennifer advised us to attend, but not to speak unless directly addressed. We sat in the back row, while Patricia called the meeting to order from her position at the front table, flanked by the other board members, Treasurer Robert Walsh, Secretary Denise Cooper, and members at large Thomas Brighton and Karren Yates. Before we begin regular business, I need to address the lawsuit filed against this board by the Daniels family, Patricia said, her voice tight. These baseless accusations are an attack on the entire community and the work we do to maintain property values and quality of life in Pinewood Grove Estates. A hand went up in the middle of the room. It was Jack Martinez, whose son had been targeted for playing basketball. Point of order, didn't you call CPS on the Daniels because their kids built a snowman? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I called because I witnessed what I believed to be child neglect, Patricia said stiffly. Any concerned citizen would do the same. Except it wasn't neglect, Jack countered. I saw those kids that morning. They were having fun, dressed warm, and their dad was right there. You called CPS to harass them because you didn't like their snowman. That's insane. More voices joined in. Sarah Johnson stood up. You threatened to report us for leaving Christmas lights up 3 days past your arbitrary deadline. When does this stop? Patricia's face was turning red. If you all would simply follow the community guidelines say nothing about snowmen, another voice called out. The meeting devolved into chaos. Jennifer leaned over and whispered, This is better than I expected. Public sentiment is clearly on your side. Patricia was banging her gavel, trying to restore order, but people were standing up now, sharing their own stories of HOA overreach. The Thompsons had been fined $200 because their lawn was a quarter-inch too tall during a drought. The Kennedys had received a violation notice because their teenage daughter parked her car on the street overnight when their garage was full. The list went on and on. Finally, Robert Walsh, the treasurer, stood up and held his hands up for quiet. Folks, please, let's all calm down. Patricia, I think we need to discuss this matter in the executive session. There's nothing to discuss, Patricia snapped. I stand by my actions. Then you're standing alone, Denise Cooper said quietly. I didn't sign up to be part of a board that harasses families and wastes CPS resources. I'm resigning, effective immediately. She gathered her papers and walked out. The room erupted again. Thomas Brighton looked uncomfortable. Patricia, maybe we should consider a more conciliatory approach. This lawsuit could cost the HOA tens of thousands in legal fees, even if we win. If you're all too weak to maintain standards, then I'll do it myself, Patricia said. Karren Yates shook her head. I'm with Denise. This has gone too far. She stood and left as well. The meeting ended shortly after, with nothing accomplished except the disintegration of the HOA board's unity. Jennifer looked pleased as we left the community center. That went very well. The board is fractured, and we have witnesses now who will testify to a pattern of harassment. This strengthens our case significantly. Over the next 2 weeks, things escalated in ways I never anticipated. 3 more board members resigned, leaving only Patricia and Robert. Patricia sent out an email to the entire neighborhood, painting herself as a victim of a coordinated attack on the HOA's authority. Most people ignored it or responded with their own stories of Patricia's overreach. Then, the police investigation concluded. Officer Rodriguez called me on a Friday afternoon. Mr. Daniels, I wanted to let you know that we've completed our investigation into the false CPS report. We have enough evidence to charge Patricia Henderson with filing a false report, which is a misdemeanor. The DA's office will be moving forward with prosecution. Thank you, officer. I appreciate you taking this seriously. We have to. False reports hurt everyone. There'll be a court date set soon, and you'll likely be called as a witness. I hung up and immediately called Jennifer to update her. Perfect timing, she said. Discovery is moving forward on the civil case, and the HOA's insurance company is already making noise about wanting to settle. Apparently, their policy doesn't cover board members who commit criminal acts while performing their duties. Patricia may be personally liable for the entire judgment. How much are we talking about? Based on the emotional distress, the pattern of harassment, and now the criminal charges, I'd say we're looking at somewhere between $50,000 and $200,000, depending on whether we go to trial and what a jury decides. But Keith, there's something else we need to consider. The other homeowners have been contacting me. They want to know if they can join the suit as a class action. That possibility had never occurred to me. Can they? Absolutely. If we can establish that the board, under Patricia's leadership, systematically harassed multiple families, we could be looking at a much larger case. The HOA itself could be found liable for creating a hostile living environment. Do it. If she's done this to us, she's probably done it to others who were too afraid to fight back. Jennifer started reaching out to the other homeowners who'd spoken up at the meeting. Within a week, we had 17 families signed on to an expanded lawsuit. The stories were depressingly similar: excessive fines for minor issues, threats of liens against properties, harassment over violations that existed only in Patricia's interpretation of the rules. The Martinez family had been fined $3,000 over 6 months for various alleged violations. The Johnsons had been threatened with foreclosure over unpaid fines related to their Christmas lights. The Kennedys' daughter had been reported to the police for suspicious activity when she came home late from work at her restaurant job. Patricia's criminal court date arrived in early April. Michelle and I sat in the gallery of Boulder County Court as Patricia stood before Judge Margaret Reeves, a stern woman in her 60s with a reputation for not tolerating nonsense. The prosecutor, a young man named David Chen, presented the case efficiently. He called Sandra Chen from CPS to testify. In your professional opinion, was there any merit to the allegations made in the report? David asked. None. None whatsoever, Sandra said firmly. The children were healthy, well cared for, and the home environment was exemplary. The photographs taken on the day in question showed appropriate supervision and age-appropriate winter play. In my 15 years with CPS, this was one of the most clearly unfounded reports I've investigated. What impact do false reports have on your department's ability to help children who genuinely need assistance? Every false report means we're not investigating a real one. We're understaffed and overworked. When someone weaponizes our agency for personal disputes, it literally puts vulnerable children at risk. Patricia's attorney, a nervous-looking man named Gregory Simmons, tried to argue that Patricia had genuinely believed the children were in danger. Mrs. Henderson is a longtime community volunteer who has dedicated countless hours to maintaining the safety and property values of her neighborhood, Gregory said. She acted out of concern, not malice. Judge Reeves looked unimpressed. Mr. Simmons, I've reviewed the police report and the CPS records. Your client told the investigating officer, and I quote, "Maybe this will teach him to follow HOA rules." That doesn't sound like concern for child welfare. That sounds like retaliation. Patricia's face went pale. The prosecutor called me to testify next. I described the events of that Saturday morning, Patricia's threats, and the fear I'd felt when CPS showed up at my door. Mr. Daniels, at any point did Mrs. Henderson express genuine concern for your children's well-being? David asked. No, she was angry about the snowman being an unapproved decoration. She said maybe CPS would teach me to follow the rules. It was never about the kids' safety. Patricia's attorney didn't even cross-examine me. What could he say? Judge Reeves didn't take long to deliver her verdict. Mrs. Henderson, I find you guilty of filing a false report to Child Protective Services. This is a serious offense that wastes limited government resources and traumatizes innocent families. However, what concerns me even more is the pattern of behavior that has been brought to my attention through the associated civil litigation. She pulled out a document. I've reviewed the civil complaint filed against you and the HOA board. 17 families alleging systematic harassment, excessive fines, and abuse of authority. While that's not before me today in a criminal capacity, it speaks to your character and motivations. Patricia opened her mouth to speak, but Judge Reeves held up a hand. I'm sentencing you to 30 days in jail, suspended pending completion of 1 year of probation and 200 hours of community service. You will pay a fine of $1,000 and make a written apology to the Daniels family. Additionally, I'm ordering you to resign from the HOA board immediately and barring you from serving in any HOA leadership position for 5 years. Your Honor, that's not within your authority. Gregory started to protest. It absolutely is within my authority as a condition of probation. Mrs. Henderson, you have abused your position of minor authority in ways that have harmed your community. You need to step back and reflect on your behavior. If you violate any terms of your probation, you'll serve the full 30 days. Do you understand?" Patricia nodded stiffly, her face a mask of humiliation and rage. As we left the courthouse, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't over yet. The civil case was still pending, but Patricia had been held accountable. The civil case went to trial 6 weeks later. By then, the story had gained traction in local media. HOA president convicted of false CPS report made headlines in the Boulder Daily Camera. Local news stations ran stories about HOA overreach. We became something of a cause célèbre, which was both flattering and uncomfortable. Jennifer had prepared meticulously. She'd compiled hundreds of pages of documents showing the HOA's pattern of harassment under Patricia's leadership. Emails, letters, fine notices, even recordings from HOA meetings where Patricia had berated homeowners over minor issues. The trial lasted 3 days. Family after family took the stand to describe their experiences. Jack Martinez testified about receiving over 20 violation notices in 2 years, including one for his garbage cans being visible from the street for 4 hours on a non-collection day. Sarah Johnson cried as she described the stress of being threatened with foreclosure over Christmas lights. The Kennedy's daughter, a poised young woman named Brittany, talked about the humiliation of having police show up at her job because Patricia had reported her as suspicious. The HOA's defense attorney, a slick corporate lawyer named Richard Hayes, tried to argue that the board had simply been enforcing legitimate rules. "These are private communities with contractual obligations," Richard argued. "When you buy property in an HOA, you agree to abide by certain standards. The board was merely doing its job." Jennifer destroyed that argument in her closing statement. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, there's a difference between reasonable enforcement of legitimate rules and systematic harassment. The evidence shows that under Patricia Henderson's leadership, this HOA board went far beyond maintaining community standards. They targeted families, imposed excessive fines for trivial matters, and created an environment of fear and intimidation. My clients aren't asking you to abolish HOAs or eliminate all rules. They're asking you to hold this board accountable for years of abuse." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a verdict in our favor. They awarded the 17 families a total of $375,000 in damages. The courtroom erupted in cheers. But Judge Reeves wasn't done. She'd been presiding over the civil case, and as the noise died down, she spoke. Before we adjourn, I want to address something that has troubled me throughout this trial. The pattern of behavior exhibited by this HOA board represents a systemic failure of governance. The board members knew or should have known that their actions were improper, yet they continued for years. Therefore, I'm sanctioning the HOA board members who served during the period in question. She proceeded to issue personal sanctions against Patricia and the other board members who had participated in the harassment, ordering them to pay additional fines and barring them from serving on any HOA board in Colorado. Furthermore, Judge Reeves continued, I'm ordering the Pinewood Grove Estates HOA to implement immediate reforms. You will hire an independent management company to oversee operations. You will establish a formal appeals process for homeowners disputing violations. You will review all fines issued in the past 5 years and refund any that were excessive or improperly imposed. And you will provide quarterly reports to this court for the next 2 years demonstrating compliance. The HOA's attorney stood up, looking shell-shocked. Your Honor, with respect, the court doesn't have authority to dictate how an HOA operates. I have authority to remedy the harm caused by systematic harassment, Mr. Hayes. Your clients created a hostile environment through abuse of their governing authority. These remedial measures are necessary to protect the community members from further harm. If the HOA fails to comply, I'll consider it contempt of court. Are we clear? Yes? Your Honor. As we left the courthouse, reporters surrounded us. Jennifer handled most of the questions, but one reporter asked me directly, Mr. Daniels, what do you want people to take away from this case? I thought for a moment. HOAs serve a purpose. They maintain common areas, enforce reasonable standards, and help communities function. But when board members forget they're serving their neighbors, not ruling over subjects, things go wrong. No one should have to live in fear in their own neighborhood, and no one should ever weaponize child protective services for a personal grudge. The aftermath took months to fully play out. Patricia's house went up for sale within a week of the civil trial ending. She moved to Denver, according to neighborhood gossip. Robert Walsh resigned from the board and issued a public apology. The remaining board members were all voted out in a special election. The new board, led by Jack Martinez as president, implemented all of Judge Reeves's ordered reforms and then some. They hired a professional management company, established clear appeals procedures, and revised the community guidelines to eliminate the most ridiculous rules. The requirement for HOA approval of snowmen was, unsurprisingly, removed. The insurance company paid out most of the judgment, though Patricia ended up personally liable for about $75,000 after her policy limits were exhausted. I heard through the grapevine that she filed for bankruptcy. I felt a little guilty about that, but Michelle reminded me that Patricia had made her choices. She'd chosen to abuse her authority. She'd chosen to call CPS over a snowman. She'd chosen to fight rather than admit wrongdoing. The consequences were hers to bear. The refund program for excessive fines ended up distributing over $100,000 back to homeowners. Families who'd been living under the threat of foreclosure suddenly had their fines wiped away. The atmosphere in the neighborhood changed almost overnight. People started actually talking to each other again, instead of viewing their neighbors as potential violations waiting to happen. Emma and Jake never fully understood what had happened. They knew there'd been trouble with the mean lady down the street, and that we'd had to go to court, but we shielded them from most of it. They were just happy they could ride their bikes and build snowmen without someone yelling at their parents. The case attracted attention beyond Boulder. HOA reform advocates reached out, asking us to speak at meetings and conferences. We declined most requests. We just wanted to get back to normal life, but Jennifer started taking on more HOA cases, specializing in homeowner rights. One case that came out of our lawsuit particularly satisfied me. The Thompsons, who'd been fined during a drought, received a full refund and ended up suing their landscaping company that had overcharged them for mandatory drought-resistant lawn treatments that were just regular treatments at inflated prices. Turned out Patricia's nephew owned the company, and the HOA had been steering business to him in exchange for kickbacks. The district attorney opened an investigation into that, which was still ongoing when the year ended. As summer arrived and the mountains turned green, Michelle and I sat on our porch watching Emma and Jake play in the sprinkler. Our neighbor, Tom Chen, walked over with a beer in hand. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. "Pull up a chair." Tom had been one of the families in the lawsuit. He'd been fined repeatedly for parking his work truck in his own driveway. "You know, I was thinking about selling before all this went down," Tom said. "Patricia had made this place miserable. Now? I actually like living here again." "Yeah," I agreed. "It feels like an actual neighborhood instead of a prison camp." "Your kid started it all, you know. That snowman." I laughed. A slightly crooked snowman with too much scarf brought down an entire HOA board. If you'd told me that was possible a year ago, I never would have believed it. "Sometimes the smallest things expose the biggest problems," Tom said philosophically. "Patricia would have kept going if you hadn't stood up to her. We all owed you for that." "I just wanted my kids to build a snowman in peace. And now everyone's kids can. That's not nothing." As the sun set over the Rockies, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I reflected on everything that had happened. The fear and anger when CPS showed up, the stress of the legal battles, the satisfaction of justice being served, the relief of Patricia being gone. But more than anything, I thought about how easily it could have gone differently. If I'd had less money for lawyers, if Michelle and I hadn't documented everything, if other neighbors hadn't been willing to come forward, Patricia could have continued her reign of petty tyranny indefinitely. The final piece of closure came in October, almost a year after the snowman incident. I received a letter in the mail, forwarded from Patricia's last known address. Inside was a single page, handwritten. "Keith, I've had a lot of time to think about what happened. My therapist says I need to make amends. I'm sorry for calling CPS. I'm sorry for the harassment and the stress I put your family through. I was wrong. I let the power go to my head, and I hurt a lot of people. I hope you and your family are doing well. Patricia." I showed it to Michelle. Do you think she means it? Michelle asked. I don't know. Maybe. Probably doesn't matter either way. Are you going to respond? I thought about it for a long moment, then folded the letter and put it in a drawer. No, that chapter's closed. That Christmas, our neighborhood had a holiday decorating contest. Not mandatory, not judged by the HOA, just neighbors voting for their favorites with donations going to a local children's charity. We went all out, covering our house in lights and setting up an elaborate nativity scene. And in the front yard, Emma and Jake built another snowman. This one was even more crooked than the first, with a ridiculous number of scarves and hats. It was beautiful. Jack Martinez stopped by while we were putting the finishing touches on it. No HOA approval needed? He joked. Not anymore, I said, grinning. Good, because I'm pretty sure that snowman violates at least 3 guidelines in the old bylaws. Which is exactly why those bylaws needed to change. Emma ran up to us, covered in snow. Dad, can we build another one in the backyard? You can build as many as you want, kiddo. She ran off, already planning her next creation with Jake. Michelle came out with hot chocolate for everyone, and we stood there in our front yard, surrounded by neighbors who'd become real friends through shared adversity. You know what the best part of all this is? Michelle said. What's that? We proved that standing up to bullies works, even when the bully has authority, even when it seems easier to just comply and keep your head down. Fighting back is worth it. She was right. It hadn't been easy. There were moments during the legal battles when I'd questioned whether we were doing the right thing, whether the stress and expense were worth it. But every time I saw my kids playing without fear, every time a neighbor thanked us for helping them get their lives back, I knew we'd made the right choice. The Pinewood Grove. Estates HOA still exists. It still enforces rules about lawn maintenance and noise levels and parking. But now it does so reasonably, with actual concern for the community rather than power-tripping authoritarianism. The quarterly reports to Judge Reeves showed consistent improvement, and after 2 years, she released the HOA from court supervision. Patricia never came back to Boulder. I heard she was living in Aurora and working as a receptionist at a dental office. Part of me hoped she'd learned from the experience, that she'd found some peace and perspective. Another part of me didn't really care what happened to her, as long as she stayed away from positions of petty authority. The media attention eventually faded. We got a few calls from documentary filmmakers and podcasters wanting to tell our story, but we mostly declined. This wasn't about fame or revenge. It was about protecting our family and making sure other families didn't have to go through what we did. Jennifer Morrison ended up writing a book about HOA reform, featuring our case prominently. She donated the proceeds to legal aid organizations that help homeowners fight back against HOA abuse. The book became something of a sensation in certain circles, leading to actual legislative changes in Colorado regarding HOA oversight and homeowner rights. 2 years after the snowman incident, the Colorado legislature passed the Henderson Act, informally named after Patricia. It required HOAs to have formal appeals processes, limited the fines they could impose, and created a state ombudsman to investigate complaints of HOA abuse. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Emma and Jake grew up with no memory of the fear and stress of that time. For them, it was just a story their parents told sometimes, about the winter they built a snowman that changed everything. They didn't understand the deeper implications, and that was fine. They just knew they lived in a good neighborhood where kids could be kids. As for me and Michelle, we stayed in Pinewood Grove Estates. Some people asked why we didn't move after everything that happened, but the truth was, it was our home. We'd fought for the right to live there peacefully, and we weren't about to let Patricia's ghost drive us away. Besides, our house had become something of a landmark. When new families toured the neighborhood, real estate agents would point it out. That's the house with the famous snowman, they'd say. It was oddly flattering. 3 winters after the original incident, we got another significant snowfall. Emma, now 10, and Jake, now 8, rushed outside to build snowmen just like they had before. This time, half the neighborhood kids joined them. By the end of the day, there were 15 snowmen lining our street, each one more creative and ridiculous than the last. Jack Martinez, still HOA president, drove by and stopped to take pictures. This would have given Patricia a heart attack, he said, laughing. Good thing she's not here then, I replied. You know, in a weird way, we should thank her. She was such a nightmare that she forced us all to fix the system. This is the best-run HOA in Boulder now. I'd rather have just had a functional HOA from the start and skipped the trauma, I said dryly. Fair point. That evening, as we cleaned up the kitchen after dinner, Michelle brought up something we'd been discussing on and off for months. I think we should start going to the HOA meetings again. Really? I thought we were enjoying our break from neighborhood politics. We are. But people need to stay involved. That's how Patricia happened in the first place. Everyone was so busy with their own lives that they let her take over. If we want to keep things good, we need to participate. She was right, of course. Democracy, even the mundane democracy of a homeowners association, required participation. The price of liberty, as they say, is eternal vigilance. So we started attending the monthly meetings again. They were dramatically different from the contentious affairs under Patricia's rule. The new board actually listened to homeowners, considered different perspectives, and made reasonable decisions. Fines were rare and proportionate. Enforcement was consistent, but fair. It was, frankly, boring, which was exactly how HOA meetings should be. Years passed. Emma went to middle school, then high school. Jake followed behind her. The neighborhood cycled through new families and old families moving on, but the reforms held. The culture Patricia had created was replaced by something healthier and more sustainable. I ran into Sandra Chen, the CPS caseworker, at a community event about 5 years after our case. She remembered me immediately. Mr. Daniels, how are your kids? They're great, teenagers now, which brings its own challenges, but nothing involving false accusations, she laughed. I'm glad to hear it. You know, your case led to some policy changes in our department. We now have stricter screening for reports that might be retaliatory or malicious. That's good. I'd hate for other families to go through what we did. It still happens sometimes, but we're more aware now. And the publicity from your case made people think twice before weaponizing our agency. It was gratifying to know that something positive had come from our ordeal beyond just our own vindication. The judge who presided over our case, Judge Margaret Reeves, retired a few years later. The local bar association held a ceremony honoring her career, and Michelle and I attended. When we approached her to say thank you, she smiled warmly. The Daniels family. How are those snowman building children of yours? Growing up fast, Your Honor. I've always believed that judges have a responsibility to use common sense, not just legal precedent. Your case was one where the law was clear, but more importantly, basic human decency was at stake. I'm glad I could help. You did more than help. You sent a message that abuse of authority has consequences. That's a message that always needs sending. Power, even small power like an HOA board, can corrupt. Keeping people accountable is essential. Looking back on everything now, from the vantage point of someone who survived and ultimately prevailed, I can see patterns I missed in the moment. Patricia's behavior wasn't really about snowmen or Christmas lights or parking violations. It was about control. She'd found a small domain where she could exert authority, and she'd become addicted to it. The tragedy was that with different leadership, with a collaborative approach instead of an authoritarian one, she could have actually made the neighborhood better. There were legitimate issues that needed addressing: maintenance of common areas, noise complaints, actual safety concerns. But she'd poisoned the well so thoroughly that people had stopped listening to anything the HOA said. The new board under Jack's leadership managed to accomplish more in 2 years than Patricia's board had in 10, precisely because they worked with people instead of against them. They solved drainage problems, upgraded the playground, negotiated better rates for snow removal, and kept the community running smoothly, all without making anyone feel oppressed. It was a lesson in leadership that extended far beyond our little neighborhood. I found myself thinking about it at work, in how I managed my team at the accounting firm, in how I parented Emma and Jake. Authority without empathy becomes tyranny, no matter the scale. Emma, interestingly, ended up writing about the snowman incident for a college application essay. She framed it as a lesson in civic responsibility and standing up for what's right. We didn't know she was writing about it until she asked us to proofread the essay. I hope it's okay that I used our story, she said nervously. Of course it's okay. It's your story too. I've been thinking about studying law. I want to help people like Dad helped our neighbors. Michelle and I exchanged a glance. We'd never pushed her toward any particular career, but if this was what inspired her, we couldn't be prouder. Jake, on the other hand, decided he wanted to be a professional snowman builder, which was less practical but equally endearing. He'd probably change his mind a dozen times before settling on something, but that was the privilege of childhood. The snowman that started it all, that lopsided creation with too much scarf, had melted within 2 weeks. But its impact lasted years. It exposed corruption, triggered reforms, and ultimately made our community stronger. Not bad for some packed snow and a carrot. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd just taken the snowman down when Patricia demanded it. If I'd apologized and promised to seek HOA approval before any future lawn decorations. It would have been easier in the short term. No CPS investigation, no lawsuits, no stress. But 17 families would still be living under Patricia's thumb. Kids would still be getting their parents in trouble for playing outside. The culture of fear and petty authoritarianism would have continued unchecked. Standing up to her was the right choice. It wasn't easy, and there were moments I doubted that. But ultimately, it was right. And teaching my kids that standing up to bullies, even when it's hard, even when they have authority, was worth any temporary discomfort we endured. Now, whenever it snows, the neighborhood kids build snowmen without a second thought. They build them in front yards, in parks, on common ground. They build them with wild abandon, each creation a small act of freedom that they don't even realize they're exercising. And every winter, when that first good snow falls, Emma and Jake still build a snowman in our front yard. It's become a tradition, a way of honoring what happened and celebrating how far we've come. This year's snowman had a top hat and a bow tie, courtesy of some costume accessories Emma found in the basement. Jake added stick arms positioned like it was dancing. It was perfect in its imperfection, joyful in its creation. As I stood on the porch watching them, coffee in hand just like that morning years ago, I felt a deep sense of contentment. We'd fought for this simple pleasure, this basic right of children to play in the snow without fear of retribution. We'd won. And in winning, we'd made things better, not just for our family, but for everyone around us. Patricia Henderson had tried to teach us a lesson about following rules and respecting authority. Instead, she'd inadvertently taught us something far more valuable, that authority must be questioned, that rules must serve people rather than the other way around, and that sometimes a snowman is worth fighting for. The Pinewood Grove. Estates HOA still exists, still maintaining our neighborhood, still enforcing reasonable standards, but it does so with the understanding that it serves the community, not rules it. That lesson, hard-won and expensively learned, has made all the difference. And so our story ends not with dramatic confrontation, but with quiet satisfaction. A neighborhood healed, a family vindicated, and children building snowmen in peace. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it's just the sound of kids laughing in the snow, free from the fear of petty tyrants who forgot that power should serve people, not the other way around. I raised my coffee mug in a silent toast to that crooked snowman from years ago, the one that changed everything. Then I called to Emma and Jake that hot chocolate was ready, and we all went inside to warm up together in our home, in our neighborhood, where snowmen were not just allowed, but celebrated.